Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present LCHAYIM, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there are certain men and women in the world Jewish community who, by dint of intellect and soul and passion for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel, are able to make an extraordinary contribution to Jewish life, shaping the Jewish present and the Jewish future. And lucky me, I have the chance to sit with someone I have seen from afar for years and years and years. Many of you have too. Someone whom I have admired and have appreciated the contribution he has made to Jewish life and to the existence and vitality of the state of Israel. It is my extreme honor to welcome and present to you Moshe Arens, who for, the last, 40, 50 years has been making an extraordinary contribution to Jewish life. Many of you have seen him often on television. For a long time, he was a major diplomat on the Israeli scene. He was the Israeli ambassador to the United States, and I was doing LCHAYIM. I was doing this program on radio in the late 70s, early 80s, and I would watch you all the time. And whenever you would turn on one of the major talk shows, the person representing the state of Israel on American television would be Moshe Arens. And he was the mentor to Benjamin Netanyahu, brought him over as part of the diplomatic corps. Then he served as Minister of Defense. He served as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he currently is the chairman of the International Board of Governors of Ariel University. Ariel University, of course, a major Jewish community on the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. And he continues to make a contribution to Jewish life. And you have seen so much, and now you're sitting here. First, I want you to know what a personal privilege it is, and I thank you so much for making time for us.
I'm embarrassed by your compliments.
Not at all.
I don't deserve all that.
No, you deserve much more. I visited Ariel. I took a group of American Jews to the city. And I'm not telling you something you don't know, the extent to which American Jews, and Americans in general, have so many misconceptions about what Jewish life on the West Bank, Judea, Samaria is, what a settlement is. And the word, Moshe, I feel that the word settlement was a very poor use of language. And that in essence, we're really talking about communities of various sizes, but sometimes they become small cities of major Jewish life. And they are a matter of contention. And in the American Jewish community, there is a split as to the appropriateness of settlements, the appropriateness of continuing to add to settlements. So I want to begin by asking you to just talk in general. How you feel about Ariel in particular, and how you feel the entire issue of Jewish settlements on the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, how it is described in the current discussion, especially in the peace process, and whether there is something you wish American Jews understood more.
Well, I think first of all the nomenclature is really mistaken, because every town and city in the state of Israel or in the area of Judea or Samaria, these are all settlements. The Jews came to settle in the land of Israel. And they started doing that in fairly large numbers, maybe over 100 years ago, right? And so if you just try to define, or if you define just those areas of a Jewish presence in a city or in a village or in a farming community that is located beyond the 1949 armistice lines as settlement, and everything else is not a settlement. Tel Aviv is not a settlement, right? Or Haifa is not a settlement, or Petah Tikva is not a settlement. I think you really don't have your numbers right. It is true that their armistice lines were defined as a result of armistice agreements in 1949. And on the 15th of May, Arab armies, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, Jordanians, invaded the land of Israel and tried to snuff out the Jewish state which was declared on the 15th of May. Well, fortunately, they were not successful. And when it became clear to them that they were about to be beaten totally, with not much left of their armed forces, they in effect sued for a ceasefire agreement.
Not for peace.
Not for peace.
Exactly.
They thought that the Arab world was so large that this, even if they did not, if they lost, in this particular case, they lost ground. They didn't lose the war, they lost ground. And so they asked for a ceasefire, and the Israeli government under Mr. Ben-Gurion, who was then the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, agreed to a ceasefire. And it became a ceasefire in place. And so everything that is east of the ceasefire, looking east from Tel Aviv, is Judea and Samaria. At the time, it was taken over by the Jordanians. That's how far the Jordanian army got. In the process, they captured Jewish settlements, they destroyed Jewish settlements, they took over the Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, they blew up all the synagogues, they expelled all the people, those that were still alive after the fighting, the rest were killed. They took over Gush Etzion, today one of the big settlements, right, not far from Jerusalem. Destroyed the settlements, killed the people, expelled whoever was left alive, and that was the situation from 1949 until 1967.
I want to just make sure our audience understands, because Moshe Arens, there is so much misunderstanding of what the Israeli border is, what is called the Green Line. And if you ask most American Jews, how did the Green Line come to be? What does that represent? Most American Jews will tell you, well, that was the line drawn by the United Nations partition plan. When in fact, you have pointed out that what we understand as the modern border of the modern state of Israel was simply where the armies stopped fighting on a given day in January of 1949. And wherever they stopped, that became a ceasefire line, nothing more. It de facto over time became the border of the state of Israel. But it was not created by any international body. There is no juridical claim that this was created by some institutional power or some agreement between nations that this should be the border of Israel. If the ceasefire had not gone into effect on the day it did, if it had gone into effect a month later, the line may have been closer to the Jordan River.
The line would have been at the Jordan River.
Exactly.
Because the Arab armies had collapsed at that point.
Yes, but we should again point out what you're saying is so important for Americans and American Jews to understand. The Arabs basically wanted the powers of the world, especially the United States, to impose a ceasefire because they realized that the longer they fought, the more the Israelis would push towards the Jordan River, and there would be no room for a Palestinian state and both. They didn't want a Palestinian state. They just wanted, right. They at that point wanted no Israel. But your point is that there is nothing intrinsically different about a piece of land on the east side of that Green Line or the west side of the Green Line, and that everywhere Jews lived, they were, quote, settling, whether it was Tel Aviv or whether it was Haifa or Ashkelon or whether it was Hebron. And so from a historical perspective, this may not be from a geopolitical perspective, but from a historical perspective, your point is that the entire Eretz Yisrael on both sides of what's called the Green Line is in essence of the same quality, correct?
I think you might say chronologically not exactly, because once the ceasefire was agreed upon, the Jordanians found themselves in charge of Judea and Samaria. They had conquered that area, and until 1967, right, so that's some 18 years later, this was territory run and controlled by the Jordanians. They annexed the area to Jordan, by the way. They gave the Arab population in the area Jordanian citizenship.
Jordanian citizenship.
Yes. They made it part of Jordan. It was not recognized by the international community. I think it was recognized by Britain and Pakistan. Two countries in the international community recognized the Jordanian annexation of Judea and Samaria and what is referred to as the West Bank. until 1967, the king of Jordan, King Hussein, joined the Egyptians and the Syrians in a renewed attack upon Israel. That's the Six-Day War, 1967. Well, they lost that war. And so when that war was over, 6 days later, this area of Judea and Samaria came under Israeli control. And it's been under Israeli control ever since.
Do you think Israel should have annexed that territory?
It's hard in retrospect
Yes.
to say what you might have done or what you should have done. The reason that it was not annexed was that at the time, Israeli governments and the people of Israel, so impressed by the brilliant victory scored in 6 days, that they were convinced that now the Arabs would make peace. So in that frame of mind, they looked upon these areas as bargaining chips. So when the Jordanians come to the table and they want to make peace, we'd say, well, now let's talk about Judea and Samaria, right? You want it back, we control it today. Let's see if we can reach a compromise. But the Arabs never came to the peace table.
Tell everybody what Khartoum was.
Well, that was the next step. They had the Khartoum Conference of the Arab world.
This is September of 67, after the June War of 67.
Right.
The Arabs went to Khartoum and they said,
Three no's. No to negotiations, no to peace with Israel, no to the existence of
no recognition.
No recognition.
Where were you then?
I was in Israel.
You were in Israel. But you were in Israel in 48.
Yes.
I mean, you've seen it all. Moshe Arens, you have been there.
So many things have happened in the Holy Land in that period from 1948 that nobody has seen at all. Everybody's seen certain bits and pieces of it, and everybody's made some kind of a contribution.
What were you doing in 67?
I was working at Israel Aircraft Industries. I was the chief engineer.
Okay, you were not in government yet.
No.
The way you are understood is that you are on the Israeli right. Is that fair?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Do you remember what you were thinking about back in 67? Because you made a very good point. It's very easy to look back and to bring today's perspective and to impose it upon a time that was so different. But in 67, if the government saw this as an opportunity to finally really create a peaceful existence with the Arab world, and if it meant giving back to Jordan or some other entity, either parts or all of what had been liberated, occupied now by Israel after the 67 war, in 67, would you have endorsed that decision?
I've always been of the opinion that the land of Israel, that the Jewish people have a title to that land, that we are there legally for many, many reasons, not only biblical reasons, but also because of international recognition of the League of Nations mandate. So I would have been very surprised had negotiations been initiated and had the Israeli government offered to vacate Judea and Samaria. What did happen, as you probably know, is the Israeli government, in the wake of the Six-Day War, did annex to Israel East Jerusalem. That was the parts of Jerusalem that had been under Jordanian control and were freed during the Six-Day War. That has been annexed, and that is today an integral part of the state of Israel. The people don't recognize that, right? Mm-hmm. And when the U.S. State Department talks about buildings in the territories, they also refer to buildings in Jerusalem.
That is correct.
And they object to that. But the Israeli government at that time took one step, certain part, very important part, namely the eastern parts of Jerusalem were next to the state of Israel, so that Jerusalem was united, but the rest was left in limbo, as I already told you, in the expectation that there would be negotiations, and they did not want to preempt the negotiations.
Okay, and here we are, as we tape right now in 2014, and that limbo has continued.
And that limbo has continued for a long time, maybe too long a time. In retrospect, I think the Israeli government should certainly have begun negotiating and speaking to the population in the area, to the representatives of the population. It should have been understood that that sort of situation, that ill-defined situation, really should not and could not go on forever. But it did not go on forever, but it went on for, what, how many years now? Since 1967? A good many years, right. So we're still there.
Okay.
We're still there.
Are you in favor of the two-state solution?
No. I'm not, and not only that, I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think it's going to be. So people are probably surprised to hear me say that, because it's become sort of a slogan, the obvious thing promoted by not only John Kerry and President of the United States, President Obama, but our Prime Minister. Netanyahu has said that he's for the two-state solution. And there have been negotiations going on now for the past 9 months. Now they've fallen apart, that presumably were going to lead to a two-state solution, and now these negotiations have ceased.
But if the negotiations had gone forward, and if there were a Palestinian leadership which genuinely wanted to live side by side with a Jewish state of Israel, and it meant creating a Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, for real peace, would you have supported it?
Well, real peace, that's the key word, right?
It's only real peace is what I'm not talking about anything other than a real peace. I'm asking you a theoretical question. In theory, would Moshe Arens say, if you could give me real peace, yes, I'd give up the West Bank?
Well, first of all, let me bring you back down to earth. The negotiations were conducted with Mahmoud Abbas, who the Arabs call Abu Mazen. And this man, who's the head of the Palestinian Authority, does not represent all the Palestinians. At best, maybe he claims to represent the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria. Does not represent the Palestinians in Gaza. They are run by Hamas. Hamas says he has no right to negotiate in the name of the Palestinians. We do not recognize whatever agreement he ends up making. And what that means is that if Israel were to have reached an agreement with him, at the price, say, of Judea and Samaria, right? All parts of it, that wouldn't have been the end of the conflict. Conflict would have gone on. Hamas would have said, we don't recognize the agreement. We have claims beyond anything that has been agreed to with Mahmoud Abbas. So that is something that it took a long time for John Kerry to understand, that these negotiations were not leading to a resolution of the agreement at all. They might have led, if Israel had assented to it, to Israel just giving up the Judea and Samaria. Wouldn't be real peace. Wouldn't be peace at all. The conflict would continue. So in that sense, I was sure that the negotiations weren't going anywhere, because I think that Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian negotiator, also understood that he did not have the legitimacy necessary to speak for the Palestinian people. And I think the major difficulties that we've had in the negotiations, the great reticence, hesitancy on his part to come to the table and dragging these negotiations out that led nowhere, were primarily the result of the fact that I think he knew he did not represent legitimately the Palestinian people. He couldn't make commitments. He couldn't meet any commitments he would make, and he was probably glad to see the negotiations end.
What about the fact that Hamas and Fatah have made some kind of alliance? And the suggestion is made within the American Jewish community, you see Hamas is moving towards a more moderate position, and because of this alliance, in fact, Abbas now could represent the Palestinian people as a whole.
I think that that is a mirage, because we know who Hamas is. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And not only is it a terrorist organization, it has a charter. And in that charter, it states that Hamas is pledged to the destruction of the state of Israel and to turning all of the land of Israel, including Israel, into an Islamic state. So we're not dealing with a situation where you might think Hamas has decided that extremism will get them nowhere, that they're not going to use terrorist tactics anymore, they will not send any more rockets against Israel, they will now want to make peace with Israel. That hasn't happened at all, and it's not in the cards at all.
All right, now in all fairness, I'm going to press you one more time.
All right.
I understand exactly what the reality is, and you articulate it very much as I would articulate it. that the reality is there's nobody on the other side at the moment that seems ready or able to make peace. And I think I am dubious. I don't think there's any question they're not able to. I'm also skeptical that they want peace. But there are people who I sit with all the time who tell me that I'm wrong, that Abbas really in his heart wants to live in peace with the state of Israel. But my question to you was a theoretical one. In the world in which Hamas lays down, changes its charter, and yes, wants to live in peace with Israel, I want to know whether Moshe Arens is willing to give up Judea, Samaria, if, in a situation that you and I cannot envision at the moment, actually came to be, that there was a Palestinian leadership that was willing to live in peace with the state of Israel. I want to know under those circumstances, as at the moment remote as you and I imagine they are, but in theory, would you be willing to give up land for that kind of honest peace?
Okay. I want to bring you down to earth again.
Okay.
The conflict that Israel is engaged in, not only since 1948, but ever since the beginning of Zionist settlement in the land of Israel, is a multi-dimensional conflict. It's not just between Jews and Palestinians. As a matter of fact, in the old days, until relatively recently, until Arafat set up the Palestine Liberation Organization, nobody talked about the Palestinians. The Jordanians who came into control of Judea and Samaria didn't set up a Palestinian state. There was a conflict with the Arabs, the Arab world, and really beyond that, also with the Muslim world. When you recognize that there's an automatic majority for any anti-Israeli resolution at the United Nations, it's the Muslim nations who are the backbone of that automatic majority. So if I were to say to you, oh, okay, they really want to make peace, how about giving up Judea and Samaria so they'll live in peace next to you? I say to myself, well, what's next? Is Al-Qaeda going to come into Judea and Samaria? Will they start sending rockets from there to Israel? Will the Iraqi army invade it? Will some other Arab army come into the area and we'll find them living next door to Tel Aviv? So I say no. You look at the Middle East today, that turmoil all around Israel, and I say to myself, do we want to bring that turmoil to the doorstep of Tel Aviv, to Israel's population centers? So therefore, even this assumption, for the moment, you might be enraptured by it, Here, these Palestinians, they want to make real peace with Israel, real peace. Now let's see, what are you prepared to give for real peace? It's not there. And it's going to take a long time. It's hard to envisage, exactly when this multi-dimensional conflict will really come to conclusion. When the Iraqis, look what's going on in Syria today. Muslim Brotherhood out of favor in Egypt today. Who knows for how long? When Israel can say, well, we can let our guard down. It's going to be real peace. And now let's see, what are you going to give for real peace?
Okay. Again, I find that you articulate it so well. And at the same time, I'm wondering to myself, you understand my question, and you haven't wanted to answer it, the theoretical question. And I'll tell you why it's important, and then you decide whether you want to answer it or not. There are Jews who say the following: all of Eretz Yisrael belongs to the Jews. And whether you bring God into it or you don't bring God into it, it all belongs to us. And therefore, we're not going to give up a square inch for any reason. Eretz Yisrael, both sides of the Green Line, really both sides of the Jordan, but certainly from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, it's all Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, whether there's peace or not, it would be inappropriate, it would be impossible for me to endorse giving it up. There are other people who say, for very important geopolitical reasons, which you've now listed in two categories. One category is simply with the Palestinians, the other category is with the larger Arab world. There is no possibility for peace, and therefore giving up the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, poses what you believe is a military threat to the existence of the state of Israel. And that's a different argument. I want to know whether, as an ideologue, you are against giving up any territory, even if the Messiah comes and promises you peace in the Middle East.
Well, let me
I'm going to be brought back to the ground again.
No. Let me draw an analogy, which is not in the realm of fantasy. It actually occurred and that is the peace treaty with Egypt. Right? Egypt was defeated in the Yom Kippur War. It was a very, very difficult war. They made progress, the Egyptians and the Syrians, during the first 48 hours. But within 18 days, the Israeli army stood 101 kilometers from Cairo. And the Egyptians realized that if they didn't agree to a ceasefire, that the Israeli army would be at the gates of Cairo, and their regime would fall, and then Sadat would not be the president of Egypt. And that is what led the Egyptians to agree to a peace treaty with Israel. And Menachem Begin, he negotiated that treaty. So the question immediately arose, well, under what terms? Under what terms? I voted against the agreement that Menachem Begin reached with Sadat, together with Jimmy Carter, at Camp David.
You voted against it?
I voted against. I was a senior member of Likud in the Knesset.
Okay.
Not a minister in the government.
Okay.
Not a minister in the government.
But you were part of, at that point, the decision-making process, formally.
Well, I wasn't at Camp David, and Menachem Begin did not consult with me as to whether he should or should not go back to the lines that existed, to the armistice lines, that existed in 49.
All right. You opposed the peace treaty with Egypt.
Okay. Now, I don't sign on to that statement in the sense that I was not against making peace with Israel. I only asked one question. If a country attacks you, the Egyptians attacked Israel 4 times. 1948, 1956, 64, 67, again in 1973. They attack you 4 times. They are beaten 4 times. Does that mean that you should turn over to them whatever territory they lost in these wars of aggression? Is there a precedent of this nature in international relations? I ask a rhetorical question because the answer is no. There's no precedent for that. So I would have said, if I had been at Camp David or if Mr. Begin, we were in close relations, and I was defense minister in his government in later years, he had asked me, well, what do you think? I would have said, be prepared to compromise. Be prepared to compromise. We don't insist on retaining all of the Sinai Peninsula, but don't set the precedent that the aggressor gets back whatever he's lost. There's no rationale for that. There's no justice in that either. So when Mr. Begin returned from Camp David with a result that he himself had not anticipated, he did not expect when he went to Camp David that we would have to remove Yamit, the town that was built in the Sinai, the Israeli airfields that had been built in the Sinai, the naval bases in the Red Sea. But at Camp David, I don't think the pressure was such that he finally agreed. And my own view is that to that we should not have agreed.
We should not have agreed to give back Yamit.
Everything.
You did not want to give up Yamit.
It's not only a question of Yamit. I stood and still stand by the principle that the aggressor should not be rewarded by having returned to him whatever he lost in the wars of aggression against you. Mm-hmm. Now, people say to me, and that's really a very effective response to the case I've just made, well, look, the treaty was signed in 1979. Here we are in 2014, right? 35 years later. There's been no war with Egypt. You were wrong, right? Now, was not worth it. These years of peace presumably will go on as well. Looks that way at the moment with the new Egyptian president. So, okay, so you gave up all the Sinai. So the only thing I can say of that is, was the alternative really another war? To that, I think the answer is no, although here we are guessing past history. I think no, because the Israeli victory was so effective and so overwhelming that I think nobody in the Egyptian army or in the Egyptian government in the years since then has seriously considered the possibility of going to war against Israel again. So one scenario that I would like to see as being realistic, although it's imaginary, is Mr. Begin at Camp David saying to Sadat, okay, we're prepared to compromise on the Sinai. But not everything, not everything. Not down to I don't want to set the precedent that in other peace treaties with surrounding Arab countries, everything has to be returned to them. So
Now, how does this relate to my question? What would you ultimately be willing to do on the West Bank?
It relates to the question first in the following sense, that in the Sinai, I would have been prepared to compromise. We'll draw the parallel with Judea and Samaria in a minute. I would have been prepared to compromise, but not give up everything, not set that kind of precedent. I had an occasion to discuss this with Mr. Begin only a few years later, because when Mr. Weizmann, who was defense minister, resigned, Mr. Begin turned to me and wanted me to become defense minister. And I turned him down. At the time, we were in the process of implementing the agreement with the Egyptians. We'd already turned half the Sinai over to them. And I said to him, if it is your intention, as I think it is, of now implementing the rest of the agreement and going back to the old mandatory line, then I'm not the guy to be your defense minister. And Mr. Begin said to me, and now we're getting to the question that you asked me, he said to me, listen, the Sinai is not Eretz Israel. What are you getting excited about? He said, the Bible doesn't say Sinai is Eretz Israel. Jabotinsky never said it's Eretz Israel. The chief Rabbi Goren said it's not Eretz Israel. Well, I didn't want to get into an argument with him, but I didn't think of it in those terms. I thought of it in geostrategic terms. So whether you call it Eretz Israel or you don't call it Eretz Israel, I think it would have been a mistake to turn everything over to the aggressor that he'd lost. So you asked me about Judea and Samaria. If we ever reach that fantasy land where the Arab world and the Muslim world wants to make real peace with Israel, we don't have to be concerned as to what will happen in these areas once we evacuate. I'd say, okay, we're ready to compromise. Not everything, not everything. You want me to go back to what Obama calls the 67 lines, which really are the 1949 armistice lines? I said, no. You say real peace? I said, not even for that. Compromise? Yes. That's a reasonable position. Okay.
Okay. Does Ariel stay part of Greater Israel forever?
Well, what has happened with Ariel and some other settlements, right, if we agree to call it that, is that there seems to have been an agreement that was reached by Mr. Sharon when he was Prime Minister and George Bush Jr. when he was President of the United States, that in certain locations where there was substantial Israeli settlement beyond the 49 armistice lines, that they would remain under Israeli control even within the framework of the agreement. Some people say that there would have to be quid pro quo, that Israel would have to give up some areas that are today in Israel to compensate the Palestinians for the fact that they're not getting everything, that there would have to be some territorial exchanges, but I don't believe in that. I see no rationale behind that, but that has been accepted.
And exactly where would we give up land?
Well, people say maybe it's fine. Find a place in the Negev, find a place somewhere.
Negev?
I don't
Oh, they'll be thrilled.
But it has become part of the mindset.
That's correct.
Including the American negotiators, maybe even including Mahmoud Abbas, I don't know, that in some of the locations where there is substantial Jewish settlement, they would be absorbed within the state of Israel, and as I said, they would get some compensation in return for it. Now, Ariel is one of those places because Ariel is one of the largest Jewish settlements, Israeli city,
yes,
located beyond the 1949 armistice line, which makes it seem almost inconceivable that you would go ahead and evacuate that town, which today has 20,000 population, 20,000. It's a university. If you go to Ariel, I don't know when you were there the last time. Next time you come, you'll see it's growing. There's building going on. Next time around, you'll probably have 40,000, maybe 50,000 people living there. So when you ask me about Ariel, I think really without exception, everybody agrees that no matter what, no matter when, and no matter what the circumstances of an agreement that were to be reached, Ariel will be part of the state of Israel.
For many years, you were a Knesset member as part of the Likud party.
Right.
There are American Jews who now claim the following. The government can't be serious about making peace with the Palestinians because Benjamin Netanyahu is part of a party which has moved considerably to the right and that he, when he expresses this two-state solution and says that Israel is ready to do that, his own party would never endorse an agreement with the Palestinians for a two-state solution. And that in fact, the underpinning of the Netanyahu government is such that the Israeli government today, as its constituents, as it's comprised, today's Israeli government would never endorse a two-state solution. I want to know two things from you. Are you disappointed with Benjamin Netanyahu? Again, you were his mentor for a long period of time. You brought him into America when you were the ambassador to the United States, and then he became
my DCM in Washington.
Correct. And the question is, are you disappointed in his stand today? And what do you say about this notion that, in essence, the government itself, regardless of the prime minister, is not ready to make a two-state solution compromise?
Look, it's a very complex issue.
Yes.
I think to most Israelis. You say the Likud has moved to the right. Not really. The people of Israel have moved to the right. The peace camp and those who did not agree with negotiations with Arafat and did not back the two-state solution. We had Netanyahu as prime minister, and we had Ehud Barak as prime minister. He was prepared to give back everything but the kitchen sink, you know. And I think when you look at the political map in Israel and the election results, and even the polls about whatever election we will have in the near future, it is unquestionable that the people of Israel, in terms of what they're prepared to do, the risks they are prepared to take, have moved to the right. And it's not surprising. You had the Oslo agreements and they backfired. We had a wave of terror, and it came to the cities of Israel between the year 2000 and 2002. 1,000 people were killed. Mothers wouldn't send their children to school. People wouldn't go to the movies because of these suicide bombers. Ariel Sharon moved out of Gaza, presumably to advance the peace process. We got rockets. So you don't have to be a professional pollster to understand that more and more people in Israel are saying to themselves, this is not going anywhere. We're going to give up territory, and the area we give up is going to be filled by terrorists, but people are going to send rockets against it. We're not for that. So there's been a move, and people in Israel are surprised, you know, when they realize that it's not going to be another year or two, and Netanyahu will have been prime minister longer than Ben-Gurion. And a lot of this, I guess, is the credit of Netanyahu and his abilities, but it mainly reflects the fact that the people of Israel have become much more risk-averse. Now, you asked me about Netanyahu and his declaration. He's prepared to go for a two-state solution. I think part of that has to do with the pressure he was under from the government of the United States, from the President of the United States, and I guess he felt that it was not opportune, it was not right, it might not be the best interest of Israel to say we will refuse to even enter such negotiations. I can see that. And there's another element. Demography. There are in Judea and Samaria, how many Palestinians? The fact is we don't really know for sure. We should know for sure, because some of the arguments that are being made for the Palestinian state for getting out of the area are demographic in nature. And people say, yes, we will take upon ourselves security risks. We are ready to leave some of the biblical parts of Eretz Israel because there are too many Arabs there. Can't absorb that many Arabs. Some people say we don't want any more Arabs. We already have Arabs in Israel. Enough Arabs. So I've heard Netanyahu on a number of occasions say, I don't want a binational state. I've said to him, and I've written this, I don't know if you already like to hear it or not, I said Israel today is a binational state. There are Jews living in Israel and there are Arabs, if you like, Palestinians living in Israel. So the question is, how big a minority can you contain within the state of Israel? without losing the character of a Jewish state, the nature of a Jewish state. Hebrew is the dominant language, the Israeli culture. And that's a question that's never really been fully confronted. And people who talk about giving up Judea and Samaria, in effect, they're saying, I think they don't like to hear me say that, not one more Arab. Enough Arabs. Well, first of all, I don't accept that viewpoint. I don't feel that way. And I see the Israeli Arabs gradually integrating themselves into Israeli society, becoming good citizens of the State of Israel. And I'd say I think we can certainly do that with more Arabs. Can we do it with all the Arabs in Judea and Samaria? My first question is, how many are there? Let's do a calculation. And it's interesting that even though we're talking about, in effect, a surgical operation of amputating a very important part of the land of Israel, and if that's the reason, and by the way, to most people who are for that, that's the reason. Not because they want peace, and most people in Israel really don't believe that we can see real peace on the horizon. You know, your theoretical question. Most people in Israel don't believe that, and I think the facts show that there's good reason, you know, not to be foolish and not to believe that. But more Arabs in Israel? Lots of people say, no, we don't want any more Arabs. So the question is, how many more Arabs? And can we handle it? And can we integrate them into Israeli society? Well, these are complex questions. But
are they being discussed enough?
They've not really been discussed in detail. The divide really has been between those like myself who say, well, let's take a chance, let's see. We're integrating the Israeli Arab population, we can probably integrate more, and those who in effect say, not one more, we have enough.
Well, you didn't answer also, and maybe it's not even fair to ask you whether you're disappointed in Netanyahu or not. Are you disappointed?
No, but look, on the whole, I think he's done a remarkably good job. Mm-hmm. Right? He's faced many, many challenges. He's faced pressure from the administration here in Washington. He's faced the nuclear challenge from Iran. He's faced economic challenges in Israel. He's dealt with the absorption of 1 million immigrants from the former Soviet Union. He's dealt with the absorption of the immigrants from Ethiopia. Israel is in fine shape today. You know, I mean, I think you have to say it. Like it or not, you may have criticism, don't have criticism. Israel's in fine shape.
Yeah, the only reason somebody would ask you whether you're disappointed is on his stand on the two-state solution. Whether that disappoints you, or whether you say to yourself, I understand why, and anybody in his position would say and should say the same thing.
I think that if I were in that position, I would not have said that. Mm-hmm. I think that if I were in that position, I would have said, I don't preclude the possibility, but I don't say that I'm for it.
So what would you do with the West Bank? What would you do with Judea, Samaria? What do you do with the problem? Does Israel annex it? Do you make a one-state solution, but it's a Jewish state? Do you let this situation just continue to go on? Moshe Arens, you're now Prime Minister of Israel, and you're also the Chief Rabbi, meaning everybody's coming to you for advice.
I don't have the qualifications.
What do you do?
Look, I've written about this, especially recently now that the talks broke out. First of all, there are no instant solutions. It's such a complicated problem. There's no instant solution. If I were to say, listen, you do 1, 2, 3, and the problem's solved, and I'm not in a position to do that, there's no such thing. But I've said there are 2 things that Israel should be doing right now, especially in light of the breakdown of the negotiations. 1, accelerate the integration of the Israeli Arab citizens in Israeli society.
Of Israeli Arabs.
Of Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinians, if you like, in their integration into Israeli society. There's more and more of that going on year by year. I'll give you 2 examples. Christian Palestinians, the Christian Arabs, want to join the IDF. They want to serve in the IDF. They say this is our country, and we should help defend it.
Amazing, isn't it?
That's a big change.
Mm-hmm.
Because over the years, the Christians who are a minority and who are generally discriminated against by the Muslim majority have always wanted to outdo the Muslims in terms of their anti-Israel rhetoric. It's changed. I've talked to Israeli Arabs, and they tell me, you know what brought about the change? What's happening in Syria. They see what's happening to the Christian community in Syria, and they say to themselves, the one place where Christian Arabs can live peacefully, State of Israel. We have a program for called National Service. Young people in the Arab community who are not obligated to serve in the IDF, they can do national service in hospitals and schools, the social welfare and things of that sort. The Arab Knesset members are dead set against it because they see it as a step in the integration of young Arabs into Israeli society.
A form of Arab assimilation into the Jewish culture as a
Right.
whole.
Young Arabs, Muslims, are voting with their feet. They're reporting for national service.
Amazing.
So I said that's number one. And number two, we should take effective steps in Judea and Samaria to make life easier.
For
To raise to promote the improvement in the economic situation
of the Palestinians.
of the Palestinians, to cut down on the number of roadblocks. I never would have built that wall. You may have seen that picture of the Pope next to that separation wall that was put up. You know, that wall, in my view, it's a terrible thing.
Really?
It's like a scar on the face of a beautiful woman.
People say it protects Israelis
Well,
from
you see,
suicide bombers.
It was, first of all, just think of it for a moment, you know, the land of Israel, this beautiful country, and you put the scar across the whole country, you build this wall, you know, the length of the country, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible imposition on the Palestinians who live near it or who have work land near it. And it was done in a moment of panic. After that wave of terror attacks, some of our security people said, unless you put up a wall, we're not going to be able to stop the terror. That's why many people, including myself, you know, said, well, if that's what it takes to save the lives of Jewish children from suicide bombers, go ahead, build that wall. That's not what it did. The reason that we put an end to the terrorism was the entry of the IDF into Judea and Samaria. And their presence there has put an end to terrorism, essentially. And if we were to leave the area, it's very likely that we would have a return of that kind of terrorism.
So the wall really isn't what has saved you.
The wall is not what it's...
And even without the wall, you feel the change would have occurred because of the IDF's presence in Judea, Samaria.
I think today there's no question about it. The decision was taken in a moment of panic.
Are you sure you're on the right?
That I'm on the right?
Are you sure you're on the right?
Listen,
I mean, it's surprising to hear someone who identifies with the right argue that the wall was a mistake. That's normally associated with people on the
I'll tell you
left.
another thing. That wall is going to come down.
When?
Just a matter of time. It's going to come down. And I was abashed and then embarrassed to see the Pope standing next to that wall. He went to the wall, you know, the wall from the temple. That wall is not coming down ever. And he went to that wall full of graffiti and inscription, anti-Israel inscriptions, and just like he put his hand on the wall of the temple, he put his hand on that terrible wall that's going to come down. Shouldn't be there in the first place.
It means occupation, however, will continue for a period of time. You're willing to live with that.
Well, when we say occupation, what we mean by that is that there's a presence of the IDF.
Correct.
This, you know, people make that bizarre, that terrible comparison with Nazi occupation. You know, the presence of the IDF in Judea and Samaria is nothing like it. You go to Ramallah and the cafes are open and people do whatever they want and they have their own mayors and just about everything, except foreign policy and defense policy, is handled by them. But there is a presence of the IDF, and there are checkpoints, and in many cases they make for an inconvenience when people try to go from one place to another. And the population there does not have a voice in deciding what its political future is going to be. Now that's true, by the way, of most Arab countries. The people there don't have a voice in deciding what the political future is going to be. But the Palestinians living in Israel, they have a voice. And the vote by an Israeli Arab does not weigh 1 gram less than the vote of an Israeli Jew. Exactly the same weight, exactly the same effect. So in that sense, it is, to Israelis, it's an ambiguous situation. By the way, to many Arabs, It's not that unusual and not that unpleasant. A poll that was taken in East Jerusalem, where Arabs, Palestinians were asked, if a Palestinian state is going to be set up, would you want to be in the Palestinian state, or would you like to continue to stay in the state of Israel? The majority said they want to stay in Israel. So some people say, well, it's the material benefits, healthcare, social welfare, pensions. Some people, when asked why, they said, we like to go to the beach, you know. But basically, I think it comes from understanding that living in Israel is far, far better than living in some of the Arab countries.
Mm-hmm. There are people who say that the Israeli soldier, the young Israeli, man and woman, who now has to serve in a confrontational manner with Palestinians on the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, that it is taking something from their soul, that the soul of Israel has been injured by the occupation, and that if for no other reason, the Israelis should stop occupation to save the soul of the young Israeli. And you say?
Yeah, well, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. And the next time you come to Israel, or any American visitor to Israel, and he goes into a cafe, and the waitress gives him his cappuccino, he should ask her, have you already done your army service? And invariably the answer would be yes. And if you ask her or him, well, how was it in the army? I think 99 out of 100 cases they'll tell you it's wonderful. So, I mean, that's the best answer I can give you.
Okay. You know, in America, Ariel Shavit published a book, My Promised Land. He has not published it yet in Hebrew, so I have no idea whether the Israeli public cares at all. But in the American Jewish community, this book is the book of the year, and Shavit is speaking all over America, and he was at AIPAC, and he was at Limud. And Ariel Shavit seems to really have a very powerful love for the state of Israel. And there are many things in his book which are very much about the miracle of Israel and how important it is for himself, his parents, his family, his children. But there is, Moshe Arens, an underlying theme, a chorus, a refrain that goes through the whole book, starting with chapter 1, where he describes his great-grandfather coming for Theodor Herzl to scout out the land of, which is then Palestine, before the first Zionist Congress. And what Ariel Shavit says in the book is that there were Arabs there that his grandfather did not see. Why did he not see? And this is a virtual quote. Because if my great-grandfather had seen, he would have had to go back. The ultimate refrain in Ariel Shavit's book is, as important as Israel is to the Jewish people, we took their land and we destroyed a people. And the Lidded chapter, which has gotten so much attention in the New York Times and the New Yorker, published as an isolated chapter, for Shavit, that is emblematic of what Israel had to do to establish the state of Israel. It had to do heinous things to the Palestinian people, and it basically stole another people's land. I want to know how you would respond to the notion that the land didn't belong to us, never belonged to us in some modern sense, and that we took someone else's land to create a place for Israel and for the Jewish people. And what Shavit even says is, he parrots the Palestinian narrative. This was a European created problem which was dumped in the Middle East on top of the Arabs, and that ultimately the Jews of Europe who came to Israel, both before and after the 1930s, came there on the backs of another people whom we destroyed, and we took their land.
Well, if you remember, I think in the first chapter, or maybe in the preface, Shavit talks about the fact that as he grew up, he was always afraid.
Correct.
Remember that?
Vividly.
Very afraid.
Existential fear, he describes.
Right. That's not characteristic of Israel.
Very important. Most Israelis do not grow up with existential fear.
No, not at all. Not at all. Israel, throughout the years, even when we were a small minority, even during the War of Independence. There were 600,000 Jews in Palestine at the time. All the Arab armies were coming to conquer us, to destroy us. People felt confident that we could do it, and that we could win. So I'm not a psychologist, but my guess is that part of what is written in the book has to do with his psychological fear that has obsessed him ever since he was a young boy. I have no explanation for that, but it's a fact. I mean, there probably are some others who have had that, but it's certainly not characteristic of the people of Israel. We have destroyed a people. We created the Palestinian people. There was no Palestinian nation. There was no Palestinian people before. There never was a Palestinian state. There never was Palestinian sovereignty. The people who led politically the Arab community in Palestine during the days of the Mandate called themselves the Arab Higher Committee. When the UN resolution was passed in 1947, they didn't talk about a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. They talked about a Jewish state and an Arab state. There were no Palestinian people. We didn't destroy people. As a matter of fact, it's because of the state of Israel and because Yasser Arafat took the initiative that people have begun to talk about a Palestinian people.
But that's an issue of nomenclature. What Shavit is talking about is, call them anything you want. There were Arabs living in Palestine.
Yes, there were Arabs.
And they thought it was their land.
No, they didn't think it was their land. They never ruled the land. It was run by the Ottomans, by the Turks, before the British Mandate. And there was no movement in the area to demand independence from the Turks. The fighting against the British towards the end of the British Mandate was not Arabs fighting the British, wanting to free themselves and set up a Palestinian state. It was Jews fighting the British, saying, "Get out! We want to set up an independent Jewish state." So I think this is really a misconception. There were people living there. They were a majority of the population. If you took the statistics, how many Jews were there and how many Arabs? They never had any claims to wanting to run this country as a sovereign nation, as a nation of their own.
Did they feel it was theirs? Did they, again, legality aside, and I've spoken to young people, and the young people argue, they don't come with any historical sense. They only argue the following, Moshe. They argue, there's a guy who lived on this piece of land with an olive tree. His grandfather lived there, his great-grandfather lived there, his great-great-grandfather lived there. And then one day he's told, that land will be, under that, you'll have to live under an Israeli flag.
Look here, the fact is that there was never a demand during the days of the Ottoman Empire, when the Ottomans ruled this area, for independence for the people living in that land. Now, I refer you to something that maybe you are aware of, that many people are not, and that is the testimony of Jabotinsky before the Peel Commission. That was in 1937. And the Peel Commission, the British at that time began to think that they couldn't handle the situation. They set up this commission that was going to recommend what should be done. And Jabotinsky appeared before that commission, and he said, "I have full sympathy for the Arab cause." Again, not the Palestinian cause. Well, it wasn't there. There was no Palestinian cause. It was an Arab cause. He says, but I'll draw your attention to the fact that there's a big difference between a people who have 21 countries of their own and want to have a 22nd, and a people who have no country at all. And he said, is there a country in the world where there is not a minority? Every country, he says, including Britain, you have a minority population. It's not a tragedy. So the Arabs have 21 or 22 countries. In one place there will be a minority. And I tell you, and you know that I'm right, that the situation, the status of the Arab minority in the state of Israel is far, far better than the situation of Arabs who are in a majority in other countries. So to go around with a guilt complex about that, I think maybe it goes back to fear. I don't know what it goes back to. And you cannot leave the subject without talking about the Nakba. You know what the Nakba is?
Yes, I do.
The catastrophe. So
the Arab world, the Palestinian world, has defined the War of Independence from their perspective,
right,
not as a war of independence, but as a Nakba, which means catastrophe. And they celebrate or commemorate the Nakba
right,
when we're commemorating Yom HaAtzmaut.
You know the date they picked? 15th of May. 15th of May. 15th of May is the day that the British left Palestine. It's the day that Ben-Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel. The 15th of May is the day that the Arab armies invaded Palestine in order to destroy the State of Israel. They lost that war. They brought that catastrophe upon themselves. Now, you can say there's no reason why we should not have sympathy for the fact that hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. Matter of fact, there's never been a war where people have not been displaced. This is probably the only case where refugees have continued to exist. They, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, to this day. You can express sympathy for that, but you have to understand, you, the Palestinians, the Arabs, understand, you brought that catastrophe upon yourself. Then they turn everything upside down. You know, this is I don't know, well-wishers or feeble-minded people or people who are anti-Semitic maybe, who turn this thing around and say, now the Jews are behaving like the Nazis. You know, they were persecuted by the Germans, now they're persecuting the Palestinians. Well, this is really grotesque and bizarre, and it's not true. And it's got to be fought. I know that this Nakba thing has taken root. They've been very successful in this propaganda. And some Israelis on the left, maybe even like Ariel Shavit, say we should teach the Nakba to our children in school.
I don't understand it.
No?
By the way, Israel tolerates the Arab celebration, commemoration of Nakba.
Yeah.
You know, I think to myself, do you think America would ever tolerate some kind of commemoration of 9/11 or of Pearl Harbor? It just...
Unbelievable.
It's amazing how far Israel is willing to go.
But you go back to Ariel Shavit's book.
Yes.
And some parts of it, I suppose, that maybe are most disturbing to people, he writes about Lod. Now,
That's correct. That's
now,
correct.
was captioned how the people were displaced, so forth. This was a war for life and death. You have to try to put yourself back into that period, 1940, for life and death. To people like me who came from the United States, we felt this was the last chance the Jewish people had for survival. So he thought that this was going to be a war fought with kid gloves, that nobody was going to be displaced, that nobody was going to be hurt. Has there ever been such a war? And I'm really surprised that this guy is an intelligent person. He writes beautifully. The book is very well written. I have to hand it to him. But it's not the truth. It's not the truth.
I want you to talk one moment to me about you. Am I correct that when you came to Israel in 48, you became part of the Irgun?
Well, I was a member of the Irgun before I came. Shortly after I was discharged from the American Army, I joined the Irgun.
Where?
In New York.
In New York?
Yeah.
Were you working with Bergson?
Well, we supported Bergson. Bergson was a political operation. The Irgun was, even in New York at the time, an underground organization.
What did you do?
Well, the Irgun, the strategy of the Irgun was to attack British targets all over the world, not just here in Palestine. So there was preparation for the possibility of doing that as well.
Interesting. Do you consider the Irgun a terrorist organization?
No. Look, what are terrorists? Let's define terms. Terrorists are people like that man who has just been apprehended, who went into the Jewish Museum in Brussels and killed 4 innocent people. Terrorists are people who go out and kill civilians, hijack airplanes. The Irgun never did that. The Irgun directed all its activities against the British presence and the British military presence. And in the process, some civilians were killed, like in the in the case of the King David bombing. But all their military actions were directed against British military personnel.
Mm-hmm.
That's not terrorism. That is what we call freedom fighters.
Mm-hmm.
So when terrorists call themselves freedom fighters, they kill children on the street, and they say that's a freedom fighter. That's nonsense, and it should not be accepted.
So I can't have you here without talking for one moment about Ariel itself and Ariel University. You've become now a major force in building this as a world-class academic institution.
I'm not a major force. There are people on the academic staff and administrative staff. They're doing the work, and I try to help.
But still, just talk for a moment about how you feel about Ariel University.
Well, first of all, I'm very proud that we have been recognized as a university. So we have I think if I'm not mistaken, 7 universities in Israel today. Most of them are world class, and Ariel is now the 8th university in Israel.
Mazel tov.
So it's a great educational institution. I think it will become one of the best universities in Israel. And it's located in a very important place in Ariel. I talked to you about the fact that today seems to be understood by everybody that Ariel, under all circumstances, will be part of the state of Israel. The presence of Ariel University there in Ariel is one of the reasons.
Am I correct that Ariel University also has a significant population, Arab population of students?
We have 15,000 students at Ariel University today. They come from all over Israel. Some people tend to think, the Ariel is in the territory, so
right.
probably the people studying there are also from the territory. All a bunch of settlers, they put together a settlers university. Well, it's an Israeli university, and there are people there from all over Israel, and a lot of Israeli Palestinians study there.
Mm-hmm. Again, I can't tell you what this has meant to me personally, to sit with you. And you were so patient with me. You let me throw question after question. You have done enormous work for the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Everybody does his part.
Well, you have done extraordinary. I wish you kol tuv hatzlacha in all you do. And I hope from time to time I get to talk to you again. Thank you, Moshe Arens, very, very much. My conversation with Moshe Arens, who is not only the chairman of the International Board of Governors of Ariel University in Judea, Samaria, he has also given us a lifetime of extraordinary leadership for the state of Israel, the Jewish people, and what a kick it is to have him here on LCHAYIM and to share him with you on Shalom TV. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any part of our discussion here on Shalom TV. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. LCHAYIM, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
LCHAYIM is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.